Okay, so good morning. So I want to talk a little bit about quality of decision making and how good we are in those things. But to start with, I want to tell you a little joke. Two friends meet after not seeing each other for many, many years. And the first one turns to the second and he says, "How is life?" And the second one is saying, "Life is just terrible. I keep on fighting with my wife over and over and over. It's just miserable. Fighting and fighting all the time." He turns to the first one and says, "And how is life for you?" And the guy said, "Life is just wonderful. I married Ruth 20 years ago. We're just happy as clams." And the second guy says, "How do you do it? How do you manage years after years after years without fighting?" The guy said, "Look, I'll tell you what. We have a little trick. We basically took life and we divided it into my domain and her domain. I make decisions in my domain, she makes decisions in her domain. I make all the big important decisions, she makes all the little unimportant decisions. And this way we just don't fight." And the guy said, "That's a wonderful idea, like this separation of two activities. I'll certainly do it in my own marriage from now on. Probably too late for this marriage, but the next one for sure." And then he says, "But there's one thing I don't get. How do you figure out what's a big important decision and what's a little meaningless decision?" So the first guy says, "That's easy, that's a simple decision. Takes you some time, that's okay, just early, okay. So I want to talk a little bit about decision making and people's small decisions and people's ability to make decisions. And to start with, I want you to reflect on your own ability to make decisions. We often think that people are really good at making decisions. And all we need to do is present people with some information and then people can make decisions. But is this really the case? So let's think about your own decisions. How many people here in the last month have eaten more than you think you should? That's kind of general. Okay. How many people here in the last month have exercised less than you think you should? Okay. How many people here, and please be truthful, have ever texted while driving? Come on. And of course, you all know it's stupid, right? It's not as if you need more information. It's not as if you said, "I just didn't know it was dangerous." No, you know it's dangerous. And it's also not as if you thought about the decision. It's not as if your phone was ringing in the car and you thought to yourself, "How much do I want to stay alive? How much do I not want to kill other people? How important is this text messages right now?" And you made the trade-off that this was a good thing to do. No, you knew it was a bad idea. You knew it was a stupid idea. The phone was ringing and you were tempted at that moment. All the people in the front row who are texting while we're talking, by the way, I can see you, just so it's clear. I don't mind, but just so you know that. When babies kind of hide themselves, they think that nobody can see them. Some adults keep that tendency. No, but really, go ahead if you don't. So we make lots of mistakes when we make decisions. Last question. How many people here have ever, and again, please be truthful, had unplanned, unprotected sex? Not many. That's very impressive. That's very impressive. So, we have this general idea that people can make reasonable decisions, but when we actually look at the details of life, we often find that this is not the case. So let's think about some specific examples for this. This is a study we did with a company called Express Script. Express Script is a PBM. It's a company that manages pharmaceutical benefits. And they do lots of things, but one of the things they do is they try to switch people from branded medications to generic medications. So what happens in the US, you go to your doctor, the doctor prescribes for you branded medications, and then Express Scripts tries to switch you to generic. And the way they do it is with marketing. They send people a letter and they explain to them the reasons to switch. They say, "You will save money and we will save money and the employer will save money. Life will be good, please switch." And what do people do when they get this letter? Nothing. Nobody switches. So they try postcards and they try colorful brochures. They try all kinds of things and nothing works. So for 1 year, they sent people a letter saying that if you switch to generic medication, your copay will drop for whatever it is now to 0. Really, really tempting. How many people do you think switched? Almost nobody. So they came to me. I wrote some papers about the attraction of free. So they came to talk to me and they said, look, you wrote about all this attraction of free, but we offer people to switch for free and almost nobody is taking us on the offer. What's going on? Do people really hate generics that much? Do they hate generics so much that they're not willing to do generics even if it's for free? And I said, look, it's possible that people hate generics, but it's also possible that people hate doing anything. Because if you think about the little details of the decision, what happens? You start with branded medication and you can keep on doing nothing. And if you keep on doing nothing, you stay with branded medication. Or you can switch, but switching including two things at the same time. It including choosing something else, but it also includes an action. So this is what we call a confounded design. It's a path that actually two things are varying at the same time. If you stay with branded, you stay with branded versus generic, but you also have the no action option versus the action option. Which one is it? So we said, as an experiment, why don't we mail people a letter and say, look, you have to return this letter to us. If you don't return this letter to us, we will be forced to stop your medication. But when you return this letter to us, you have two choices. You could choose branded at this price or generic at this price. There's no free anymore, but now you're forced to return the letter, and it's what we call an active choice. Which one do you want? So they agreed to do it. We did it for one company. What do you think was the percentage of people that switched? It was between 80 and 90%. So what happens here? Do people like generics or like branded? Well, what certainly is the case is that people hate returning letters. When you think about that decision, they thought of it as a choice between branded and generic, but in fact, the majority of the choice was to return a letter versus not. When we forced people to return a letter, they chose one thing. When they didn't, they chose something else. So people behave, when you start people on branded, they behave as if staying on branded is the most important thing in life and they don't really want to switch away. When you give people an active choice, all of a sudden they behave very differently. And just to make this a bit more relevant to your own life, imagine that I went tonight into your portfolio, the retirement portfolio, and I sold everything. So tomorrow morning you woke up and you had all the same amount of money. I don't steal anything, but everything was in cash, and you were supposed to reinvest your money. How many of you will have tomorrow a reinvestment strategy that is the same as you have today? Probably nobody. So why do you have the investment strategy you have today? Is it because that's really what you want? No, it's an accident of some historical precedents and you just stuck there, and we're all a little too lazy to change something. Now let's go back to the Express Script example. You could say, come on, reorganizing my portfolio, that takes a long time. But wouldn't people return a letter to Express Script if it could save them $10, $15, $20 a month for the rest of their lives? Of course people would, but not tonight. How many of you have some subscription to something that you should be canceling? Right? This is what's happening. We have all these ideas of things we want to do, but when is a good time to do it? Almost never. By the way, in the real estate world, you can think about a similar analogy to the stock market example I gave you. Imagine you took people and you just sold their house for them one night, right? And you put them in a very nice hotel and you say, let's now pick a new house. How many of them would want to go back to the house they live in, right? How much of it is just because of the force of inertia and lack of action versus what we really want to do? Another example to think about decision making is a study we did with an insurance company. This was an insurance company that said to us that they sell very good, expensive insurance. And when people call the insurance company, what do you think they care about? Price. Now, the insurance company think that they're selling high-quality insurance, but when people call, they want a quote, all they care about is price. How could you get people to consider also the quality of the insurance? How would you do it? Well, we did it by getting people to answer a question. Before the agent gave them the quote, we said, before we talk about your quote, I want to know on a scale from 1 to 7, how important is it for you to get the kind of insurance that will let you sleep well at night? How do you think people answer this question? They said 7. That's why people get insurance. But what happened after people answered 7? They were willing to buy more expensive insurance. Imagine that there's a universe of things that we could consider. How many of them do we think about? Only a small subset. And how do we get people to think about the other subset, the kind of stuff that is important to us? Asking people questions is a really good approach. Because the moment you ask people questions, they start considering that. I'll give you one more example for this. Imagine that I asked the people sitting on my right to write down 3 reasons why you love your significant other. And I asked the people sitting on my left to write 10 reasons why you love your significant other. And I gave you 10 minutes to do this. And at the end of the 10 minutes, I would say, please tell me how much do you like your significant other? What would you buy them for their birthday, for your anniversary? Do you think you'll be together in 5 years, 10 years, and so on? Do you think there will be a difference between the people who thought about 3 reasons or 10? There shouldn't. I didn't tell you anything about your significant other. I just asked you to reflect on it in a slightly different way. But guess what? There is a difference. So who do you think declare more love for the significant other? People who thought about 3 reasons or 10? Who votes for 3? Who votes for 10? Okay, and you can think about reasons in both ways. You can say the 3, you focus on the essentials. If you get 10, you think more generally. The answer is 3, actually. That people who respond to 3 reasons are more likely. And the reason is that it's really, really, really hard to come up with 10 reasons. And not only is it difficult to come up with 10 reasons, as people struggle with reasons 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, they ask themselves, how much possibly can I love this person? Now, those of you who are struggling with finding 10 reasons, listen, maybe you don't need 10 reasons. Maybe 1 is okay, right? You don't need to worry about this. But the moment you ask people to think about 10 reasons and they fall short, all of a sudden they ask themselves, what's going on here? Now, think about it more generally. When you think about housing, housing is one of the most difficult decisions anybody is facing. What is in people's mindset? What is in people's considerations? You know, I actually have an advice column in one of the newspapers, like a Dear Abby, but from an economics perspective. And people ask me lots of questions. Sometimes these questions are about housing. And it is shocking to me what are the subset of elements that people actually think about housing. Right? What's your time horizon is something that people sometimes don't seem to be thinking about. What actually makes you happy? At some point, a decision about housing is a decision about lots of trade-offs in life. You can have a smaller house and go to more vacations. You could have a bigger house and have less vacations. You can have more safe retirement, less safe retirement. You could buy more cheese if you buy a cheaper house, less cheese if you buy a smaller house. These are amazingly complex trade-offs. Do you think people are good at making those trade-offs? Of course not. If people don't even know the trade-off between what insurance they would get, if you don't ask them the right question, what are the odds that people would know what are the right houses to get? Now, sometimes we say, you know what, maybe the small decisions people don't think about, but when we get to big decisions, people actually make the right decisions, right? Because those things people think about, and particularly in housing, people spend so much time on decisions. Maybe they're experts, maybe they're doing it right. So, a couple of things about big decisions. I'll tell you a personal story on this. So as you can see, I was badly burned many years ago. I was in an accident. I was next to a magnesium flare, one of these bombs that the military sends up to the sky to light up a battlefield, and I was wounded. I was burning about 70% of my body, and I was about 3 years in hospital. And hospitals gives you lots of chances to see lots of irrational behaviors. And one of the initial questions I had in the burn department was the question of how do you remove bandages from burn patients? So imagine that most of your body was covered with burns, you had bandages, and somebody had to take the bandages off. Another question is, what is a better approach? To rip the bandages off quickly or to take them out slowly? Right? Which one is better? In one of them, you shorten the time, but the intensity is high. In the other one, you take more time, but the intensity at every moment is low. Which one is better? So why don't you consult your intuition? How many of you think that the quick ripping approach is better? Okay. How many of you think the slow approach is better? Okay, too many people are abstaining at this point in the morning. But from the people who voted, more people said that they believe in the ripping approach, and that actually is what my nurses believed in. And I think that they kind of got the intuition from waxing their legs, but that's what they believed in, and that's what they did. And as a patient, I didn't like it so much. I didn't like the quick ripping approach. And I would try to argue with them and reason with them and tell them, let's try something else. And they told me that they knew what they were doing. They were the experts. And they have been doing it for many years, for many patients. This is what everybody is doing. This is what they were taught. This is the right thing to do. They also reminded me that the word patient doesn't mean to butt in or intervene or make suggestions. Anyway, they kept on doing what they thought is the right thing to do. And then 3 years later, I left the hospital and I started studying at the university. And I learned that sometimes you can take in a question and you can do an experiment and you can try to figure out what's going on. And I was still interested in this question. You have a timeline and you have intensity and you have an experience that varies over time. And the question is, how can you take a good experience and make it better, and how do you take a worse experience and make it not as bad? So initially I didn't have much money for research, so I went to a hardware store and I got a carpenter's vise, one of those things that hold pieces of wood together. And I set it up in the lab and I invited people to come in and put 2 fingers in this vise. And I would crunch people's fingers just a little bit for different durations and intensities and time. And then I would ask them, how painful was this? And how painful was this? And if I gave you one of the last 2 painful experiences, which one would you choose to repeat? And I basically try to infer what is the model by which we accumulate information over time. And I did this experiment on many things over the years. I did it with electrical shocks and annoying sounds and all kinds of other things. And what I learned was that the nurses were wrong in some very systematic ways. First of all, it turns out that you take an experience, you make it twice as long, you don't make it twice as bad. You make it slightly worse, but not much. You change the amplitude, now you change things dramatically. Okay? So the nurses were wrong. They were trying to minimize duration. They should have actually minimized intensity. The second thing, it turns out the progression of pain over time matters a great deal. You start with low pain that goes up. That's much worse than starting with the high pain that goes down. It also turns out that if you have a really long experience of pain, it's good to break it up. Give the patients a chance to kind of brace themselves and prepare for the next experience. And the nurses got all of those things wrong. Right? And I went there and gave a talk to the nurses. And my favorite nurse came to me afterward and said that I forgot to think about her pain. She said, what about her pain? She was there delivering this pain, but this was no picnic for her either. And maybe she was just trying to rip the bandages off to get out of there as quickly as possible. But we agreed very quickly that the goal of medical treatment is not to maximize the nurse's experience. And then I said, why didn't you just try it my way? You didn't have to convert completely. Why don't you just try it my way a few times just to see how it works? Why not experiment? And the way she said it was that every day she could have done what everybody told her, what she was used to do, what her gut intuition told her to do, or she could take my approach. And she didn't think it was good for me. She didn't think it was good for her. Nobody else was doing it. And because of that, every day she took the standard approach. And for me, that's actually the biggest lesson from behavioral economics in general. It's having humility about our own intuitions about life. Think about how much of your decisions, how much of your processes are based on your intuition. Maybe something that everybody is doing, maybe something you've been taught, but something that you don't actually have good data that that's how it's working. What if we started questioning our intuition and try a different path? Would we find paths that are actually more effective, better, serve our clients in a better way? So let me give you a couple of examples of what I think are kind of bad intuitions of how people make decisions. And I want to talk a little bit about the psychology of money. And of course, there's lots of things to talk about the psychology of money, but let's just focus on a couple. So imagine that you're coming to Durham, North Carolina, where I live, and you're trying to park, and you park by a parking meter, and you look in your pockets and you don't have a quarter. And I happen to pass by, and you ask me if I have a quarter, and I say, yes, I have a quarter. I'll sell it to you for $1. How likely would you be to pay me $1 for a quarter versus how likely would you be to say, you know what, I'll take my chances? You ask people the question this way, most people say, I'll take my chances, I'm not, this is outrageous. Paying you $1 for a quarter seems terrible. Case number two, the same thing, you're parking, Durham, I pass by, you don't have a quarter. You ask me if I have a quarter, and I say, look, I don't have a quarter, but I'll tell you what. There's a bank 5 blocks down the street. If you want, I'll run down there as fast as I can. I'll change $1 for quarters. I'll run down as fast as I can back. And when I get back, the coins will be sweaty and I will be out of breath, but at least you'll have a quarter. And if I do this for you, how do you feel about paying me $1 for my time? How happy do you think people would be now? Delighted. Now, in every possible way, the second scenario is worse than the first one. You have to wait, and you get sweaty coins. But you feel much better. Why is it? Why do you feel much better? Because somebody is running for you. Now think about this. What does that mean? It means that when we get something, we don't just think about the outcome, we think about the effort that went into it. And we appreciate things to a higher degree if the effort that went into it is higher. Another example, I talked to a locksmith, and he told me that when he was a young locksmith, he was terrible at his job. It would take him a long time, plus he would break people's locks. What happened? People paid him $100 for the service, $20 for the broken lock. They gave him a tip and said thank you. He said now he's really good at it. It only takes him a few minutes. He doesn't break people's locks. He charges them less. He says nobody tips him anymore, and people argue about the price. Now, in every possible way, he's giving a better service. But we as consumers are willing to pay more for incompetent people. If incompetent people take more time to do things, it means we're willing to pay them more. But it's not just about people taking more time. It's about us being able to understand their efforts. So here's the question for you. When you work with clients, to what degree are you conveying the effort that you put into what you're showing them, what you're doing for them? And there's a very interesting thing in your business, I think, which is that your clients will see the houses that you show them, but they probably have no idea about the house you chose not to show them. So imagine that you work in the background, and you have 100 homes, and you decide to show them 2 out of the 100, but you looked at many others. Do they have any appreciation for that? Not really. There was one attempt in a website in which they tried 2 approaches. You go on the website and you search for green sweaters. In one option, they just say, here are the green sweaters we have. In the second option, they say, here are the green sweaters we have, but here's all the non-green sweaters that we sorted out for you. And we're not showing you, but just so you know, there's over 10,000 of them. What happened now? People appreciate it to a higher degree. There's another great example for this from a website called Kayak. Anybody has used Kayak? Kayak is a wonderful website, and I highly recommend it for the following reason. Kayak tells you what they're doing for you. You search for a flight, and they say, we're searching United, we're searching American, we're doing this, and they're resorting the algorithm in front of your eyes. Now, do they really search for things sequentially? Of course not, but they give us a sense of what they're doing for you. Now, imagine 3 scenarios. Scenario 1, you search for a flight, you get things instantly. Scenario 2, you search for a flight and you get the blank screen where you wait for 10 seconds. Scenario 3, you search, you press enter, you wait 10 seconds, but those 10 seconds are filled with, we're searching United, we're searching American, we're doing all these things, we're resorting. Which one do people appreciate more? People like the instant. They hate waiting 10 seconds with a blank screen. They love waiting 10 seconds with seeing what is being done for them, even more than waiting nothing, waiting no time at all. Now, I'm not saying that what you should do is you should take your clients and always make them wait longer. But people are going to wait anyway. And the question is, how do you convey your effort? How do you convey your expertise? By the way, this is also good advice for marriages. When you ask people who are married and you say, how much of the work around the household, the combined effort in the family are you producing in percentages? And you add those two numbers up, they always end up being more than 100%. And the reason is that we see all the details of everything we do. I take the garbage, my goodness, that's a really lot of work. It involves all of those things. My wife just paid the bills, that has to be simple. What happens is we just don't see the details of all the little things that go into things. But if somebody tells us, we all of a sudden have a different appreciation for that. By the way, there's another thing which is interesting, which is all of those notions go back to fairness. And fairness is the idea that we're willing to pay people if we think it's fair, not necessarily what we're getting. So imagine you finding somebody a great home. And in one case, it took you a year to search for it. In one case, they came here and you said, I have the thing for you, here it is. How would people feel about paying you in both of these cases? Very, very different. So again, it's not about making things up, but it is about getting people to appreciate the effort that has gone into something. One last thing about the psychology of money. There is something called the pain of paying. And the pain of paying is the idea that when we pay, we feel differently about the payment depending on how the payment is being made. So imagine that tonight you're going to meet for a meal, it's going to be an expensive meal, and you're going to be paying either with a credit card or with cash. Which one of those is going to feel worse? The cash. Why? It's because of the timing. Imagine a more extreme version. Imagine that I own the restaurant, and I figured out that people eat 50 bites and pay $50. And I said that because I like you so much, I'll charge you half price, only 50 cents per bite. And not just that, but I'll charge you only for the bites you eat. The bites you don't eat, you don't need to pay for it. And I'll serve you your meal, and I'll sit back, and I'll take my little notebook, and every time you take a bite, I'll mark a check mark. And at the end of the meal, I'll charge you 50 cents only for the bites you eat. How much fun will that meal be? It will be terrible, right? When I teach my students about the psychology of money, I bring pizza and I charge them 25 cents per bite. What happens? They eat such big bites that they suffer from the whole thing. But imagine you have a pizza and it's 25 cents per bite. The temptation to push it a bit more in is really, really high. What is the point? The point I want to make is that making decisions is incredibly hard. We don't know our preferences. We don't know what we like. Making trade-offs is very difficult. And housing is one of those domains in which you kind of have to do time traveling. You're looking at something now and you're really asking yourself, how happy would I be in 6 months, 3 years, 10 years with this decision and the uncertainty of my life? Incredibly hard to do. How much can you rely on people to actually make those decisions in a good way? Very hard to imagine. So what does it mean? In general, the perspective of behavioral economics is that we need to be more paternalistic. There's a version of the world that says that our only goal in life is to give people information and say to people, you make the decision. There's another version that says that making decisions for people, especially one-time large decisions that are complex and daunting, is just not going to work out. And therefore, we need to be much more paternalistic. We need to understand people better. We need to help them understand their preferences and say, based on what you've told me, I think you will be happier here, here, or here. Don't consider these other things. And I think that if you thought about your clients as less knowledgeable, less intelligent, less able, you would probably be able to serve them in a better way. And thank you very much.